Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Rebekah, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad your last experience was okay enough to come back on the show.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I want to have you on because you just released a new book, which I have uh, sitting right here, and it's called When Family Hurts. And one of the things I love going through the show is like starting it was so broad. It was like abuse in churches, that was the topic. And as we've gone on, I've gotten it to narrow in on certain topics and certain elements that I never expected, whether it's chronic illness, whether that's racism, whether that's, a whole variety of issues. But the issues that come up with family is something that I've experienced
Mhm.
personally. I know a lot of my listeners have. What kind of motivates you to kind of tackle this topic? Because, like I said, there's a million topics you could cover. What led you to family?
Well, When Family Hurts was written for people who are in the midst of a strained or confusing relationship. Um, when you go through, whether it's faith deconstruction or any sort of transition in life, it may be the loss of a child, being separated or divorced, a lifestyle choice, which could be anything. I mean, it could be we're going to buy an RV and go on the road for a year. Well, your
Yeah.
parents might not agree with that. So all of those transitions, those difficult times, a fight, whatever it might be. So if there's a strained or confusing relationship, um, this was written for you, and it's in the form of a 30-day self-coaching guide that I hope will set you on a path towards healing and clarity. And the two audiences that I really had in mind, one were those who've experienced spiritual abuse and religious trauma growing up, and so often um, that spiritual abuse started at home. it
Yeah.
may be it may be also in your church, or in a homeschool organization, or whatever it might be. But often it does start at your home. And so, because that's my experience, because that's what I've lived, I've seen that, as well as I speak with clients and I hear their stories. It always came back to these biggest struggles somehow at home, whether it's with your original family, with your parents and your siblings, but then it transitions over into your marriage and in your own parenting and the relationships that are around you. So that was the one audience. And the second one is the DNA surprise community, where I'm a director for a nonprofit. And you take an at home DNA test, and what are the results I'm staring at on a screen? You discover that your dad's not your dad, or your mom's not your mom, grandpa's not really grandpa. And so, whether it's abuse or lies, cover ups, secrets, or people just didn't know, um, it affects your family, it affects your identity to the core. And it depends on what you're having to process. Each story is unique. Each situation is very personal, and but it also affects your family, and you have to navigate these new complicated issues. And sometimes you don't know what you need, or what you're feeling, or what you want from either a new biological connection or your existing family that you find out isn't biologically related to you anymore. How do you navigate that? So those are my two audiences that I had in mind as I was writing When Family Hurts.
Yeah, the DNA side specifically was super interesting to me because it's not something I ever thought about or considered, but it is like it's like you described. If you take a DNA test and find out your dad's not your dad, like
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a well-intentioned thing they didn't share with you, like that's a
Mm-hmm.
world-shaking event. And I one thing I like though is like you mentioned those two audiences, but I think
Mm-hmm.
really the book broadly could cover 100 million different
Yes.
variations of this. And one thing when I shared about your book on TikTok, someone was like, "Oh, is this Christian focused? Is it?" And I was like, "No, it's family in general, like family
Mm-hmm.
trauma." And one of the things, and I was curious when I picked up the book how you'd handle it, is like when it comes to personal development, which I've done a lot of reading in, or when it comes to working on yourself or your own mental health,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a solo game a lot of the time. It's like, I'm going to change
Yeah.
my expectations of this. I'm going to change my
Mm-hmm.
perspective, my outlook. When it comes to the topic of family, there's other parties involved, obviously.
Yeah.
So how do you go about writing a book for someone where they have no control over how, say a dad is going to respond. Like you can follow some of the guidelines or principles in the book, but if your dad won't or your mom won't, how do you kind of approach that?
Hmm. That's a good question. That again, as in anything else, it's a very individual decision. It's a very personal, based on what it was, there abuse in the past? Was it
Mm,
just a misunderstanding? So there's a lot of variables there, but ultimately, and this is where so many self-help, what is best for you? And that's the boundaries thing. And as you go through the book, I hope it will help you figure out what is very important to you. What do you need for this
mm,
relationship to be considered healthy, or to be considered, I can have a relationship with this person? And no, you cannot control what other people do. You cannot, well, I know my dad needs to get counseling. Well, you can't make him go to counseling.
right.
He has to make that choice. And so you are only responsible for you. But so many times we don't know what we want or what we need, or
Mm,
why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And so I believe that if you go through these 30 days, that those type of questions will be answered. And so it will be, you will at least have that clarity. You will have those whys when you do make a decision on how to proceed with, do I have a relationship with this person? Do I only go for Christmas and, other holidays? How you make those choices. Also, I would say this book is not to replace therapy, to going to a therapist to make those decisions. Um, in the months here of COVID, so many times we feel alone. But yet, how many families are hurting right now
mhm,
because they're splitting over politics and medical decisions, and so. But again, I can't go to a therapist often. Either they're
mhm.
full, or they're not taking in-person visits. And so something like this is a book you can grab, and you can do it at home to be that guide that can direct you to, okay, these are the decisions I need to make, instead of saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm feeling. My dad is this and that. But it's
Mm.
helping guide you toward a little bit more clarity that can allow you to do what you need to do for those
Yeah.
decisions going forward.
Yeah, well, that clarity and that claiming of ownership, and like that's something that I had a really good conversation like 2 years ago, and I won't give any details about them at all because anything I say will make it clear who I'm talking about. But I was talking with a friend, and he was talking about, um, he's like, we're having a conversation about the whole blood is thicker than water kind of thing, like
Mhm, mhm,
you've got those relationships, and one of the things he was saying, which at the time I was like, no, I don't agree, but I've kind of come to feel the same way, is you do have a default connection with certain people that is outside of your choice, but who you
mhm,
choose to keep around, especially in the conversation of once you have kids, or, once you start making those steps out on your own, like there is some level, I think, of earning your way into like my inner circle, or earning your way to
mm,
have that relationship, that connection. And like, yes, I think that there is some value to sticking by people that have a blood connection with you. But I think also like you have to take ownership and say, okay, yeah, I know that there's this expectation on me to have a relationship with this person,
mhm,
but for me, that's been nothing but hell, So I have
mhm.
to make a choice. Like, do I keep that relationship purely because genetically there's some link between us, and I really think, again, your book doesn't give just like yes and no answers because life's a lot more
Mhm,
complicated than that. But it's really helpful going through those exercises and saying, like, what do I want? What do I need? Versus what have I
mhm.
been told to need or to do, or what do I owe to somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so often, especially if you come from a very religious background, even what you just described, it seems selfish. It seems like,
Sure.
oh, what do I need? Well, that doesn't matter. I have to sacrifice. I have to, love is putting somebody else's need first and above my own. And so we have this idea that figuring out what I need or what I want from a relationship is somehow selfish,
Hmm.
but it's not. It's very, um, what words would I use? It's again, that clarity can actually help you come closer in a relationship in certain situations.
Yeah.
Um, And so I know for me personally, I wrote the book that I needed during a time of my life.
Yeah.
And what I thought it was selfish to say, what boundaries do I need that will make me feel safe? What boundaries are needed in order for me to have a relationship with this person?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to do that. And so, again, that's why one of the reasons here's When Family Hurts, to help people make those choices and decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Boundaries is a word we say a lot. And I think sometimes words we say a lot, when you take away definition, like you start just saying the word and everyone assumes we're talking about the same thing. But what do you describe as the difference between, say, a boundary versus like putting things into boxes, where, sometimes people say boundaries, but what they mean is we just don't talk about this, or we don't ever address this tough
Mm,
issue. Um, where's the line there? Like, is it healthy to just have certain things we don't talk about with certain family members? How do you define those?
man, you're good at asking questions. That's
I,
your job.
I'm starting to get there. 200 episodes
Yay.
in, it's starting to
Ooh,
come together.
good job. Good job. So, boundaries often, and again, there's good books about boundaries. There's other, resources to go to, but boundaries are something that you keep.
Hmm.
So for example, we don't talk about politics when the family comes over for family dinners because so that's a rule. You can say that's your boundary. You know what? I
Yeah.
want my family over here, but I've seen how when we talk about COVID vaccines, how the whole family gets upset. So the
Right.
boundary in my home is I want everyone in my home. I want to do our monthly family dinners, but we don't talk about politics or we don't talk about, this, and this. Then you have to hold to that. You
Yeah.
can't bring it up. You can't, whatever. Or someone say, no, please don't speak to me that way.
Hmm.
You have to keep the boundary. You have to enforce that. Um, the boxes, which can be a toxic family trait, it can get carried down, or it might be the culture
Mhm.
from a church or school community that you were in, where we just sweep stuff under the rug and we just ignore it and we don't talk about it. That's actually very unhealthy. So there's a difference between saying, I've recognized that when we go certain places, it causes strain and tension and anger, but you've named it
Yeah.
and you are putting that boundary saying, because I value this relationship, I've decided we're not talking about these certain things, or we're not going to treat people in a certain way. You can't treat me that way because I value a relationship with you. The opposite side, which is the boxes and sweeping under the rug, is never naming it. It's never saying something for what it is. It's just choosing to ignore it and stuffing it, which is extremely unhealthy because often it will explode one day. And that will be the permanent loss of relationships, or many different things. So it's a complicated, tricky question, but it is important to know the difference between the two.
Yeah. And laying out a boundary is as simple as saying that, right? I mean, it's as simple as saying, I prefer you not talk about this here, or I prefer we don't discuss this. Because I
Yeah.
think that's where, for a lot of these topics, like I think people get stuck on, where do I bring this up? When's the right time to say this? When's the right time to, and I think we can
Mhm.
overthink, and I say we meaning me. I mean, I'll sit and overthink, like, when do I take them
Mhm.
out to lunch and talk about this? Like, how do I
Yeah.
present this? But you can set
Yeah.
boundaries literally in a moment just by saying, hey,
Yes.
I'd prefer you not talk about that here, or I'd prefer we don't discuss this here. And I think that's important too, is like, it doesn't have to be one blanket conversation that forever establishes your list of rules. It can come up in a moment. Like if something's uncomfortable in a moment, like you can lay out a boundary right then and there, which
Yes.
I think is really a valuable tool to have in your back pocket, to like know you can do that. Um,
Yes.
especially if you've got, religious ideas around it, or
Mhm.
family, or, I can't tell is that disrespectful to my parents, like, or whatever that topic is that kind of comes up.
You're an adult, not now. No.
Right.
But I'm glad you bring that up though, because that's what I see as I work with clients who are trying to put healthy boundaries in place with their families. So often they do come from that authoritarian model.
Mhm.
And when they place a boundary with their parents, they see them as being disrespectful, disobedient, rebellious, even though they're 35 years old, married with 3 children. Like,
Right.
so they do. So there, when you do place a boundary with family who is not accustomed to having boundaries as a thing, maybe you didn't have boundaries even as little kids growing up, and everybody shared everything and you never had anything that was your own.
Mm.
If you come from a big family, maybe it's community property. So when you do decide to put a boundary in place, there will be reactions because they're not accustomed to that.
Mm.
Another part of what a lot of my clients and people that I know walk through is estrangement. They have to step away or their family cuts them out,
Mm.
one or the other. um, Sometimes you make that choice because it's what's best for your mental health or what's best for your child, what's best for your family, and it's an intentional thing that you've done because, and a serious thing, but you've done it after much thought and counsel, and it's necessary. Sometimes people cut you off from an unhealthy, controlling, manipulative place
No.
where, if you don't behave like this, if you don't say the things we want you to say, if you don't believe the things that we taught you to believe, you are now no longer part of us. You are no longer part of our family. And so there's two different types, two different reasons that families become estranged. And the type where it is a choice that we've done for safety, because there's been abuse, because it's a seasonal thing for 6 months or a year for me to heal. um, all estrangement is seen as negative,
Mhm.
and just the way our culture works. And so I think there is a shift to, sometimes it is a healthy choice to be estranged. But again, it needs to be done with much consideration, much thought. But I do believe there's a shift and people are understanding that. And unfortunately, it is having to happen a lot with
Mhm.
those who are recovering from spiritual abuse, especially when it's from their families.
Right, right. Yeah, because there's a lot of that unsolicited, input or,
Mhm,
things that, you know, things just aren't respected. Like, "Oh, I don't want to cover
mhm,
this. I don't want to talk about this right now."
mhm,
For situations where there's been blips, and this is one of the things that, picking up your book and, I mean, I've happily like endorsed the book. Like, so I've
yes, you
obviously,
did. Thank you.
yeah. And for people listening, like I highly, highly recommend it. Um, but one of the things I was like, you know, flipped to first thing when I was reading through the table of contents was your section on forgiveness.
Mhm,
Because that was the deal breaker thing in any book that I'm talking about, is like how that topic is handled. Because
yeah.
when these blowups happen, when there's, someone cuts you out of the family, when there's, and a lot of times they don't do which it would be helpful if they cut you out. They keep you in and then manipulate and attack from
Mhm,
inside. Um, one of the most weaponized things is forgiveness. It's,
yeah,
oh, you're
yeah.
you're bitter. That's why you're setting these boundaries. You're upset. You're just being emotional about it. All these things come in. So,
Mhm.
what does forgiveness mean to you?
For me personally, I grew up with the Bill Gothard teachings about forgiveness. And there's two types of forgiveness, and
Mhm.
it's for the other person and for you, and this and this and this. And I used to teach it all. And that really never worked for me. Um all the teachings that I was handed from the Bible, and something just never really added up until there was this moment and season in my life, which again is one of the reasons I wrote When Family Hurts, um, where I had to forgive somebody.
Mm.
And it was a really big deal. It wasn't just, my husband forgot to get cream cheese at the grocery store, or he yelled at me because he didn't like something. It wasn't one of those everyday things. It was a big deal. And for me personally, I had this overwhelming moment of forgiveness. And it's not a Corey Ten Boom, I forgive you, my brother, I cried, where she feels the energy come up her arm when she
Mhm.
shakes the Nazi soldier's hand, is not one of those type of experiences. Um, I had this moment of understanding. It was a moment, you can use the word empathy, but it's where I went, okay, I know what was done was wrong. It was abusive. It should never have happened. But I could see things better through their perspective, the whys, the hurt, their trauma. And it did not by any means excuse what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But that was that moment of a release for me. When I understood, I could see it through their eyes and how they got to where they got. Like, how the heck did they get here? Okay, those are those things that would bring you to a place where this would be your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so that for me is how I feel forgiveness works for me.
Can that empathy ever work against us? Because I notice, like, for me, I'm hyper empathetic to people, which is funny because now it's just like a trend on TikTok. People make fun of people for saying that, but it truly is like I feel deeply other people's positions and emotions, and I've stayed in very unhealthy relationships for a long time because I've kind of weaponized empathy against myself in a lot of ways, and I've looked past a lot of really bad things. How do we kind of audit ourselves, like, and make sure we're not just excusing someone else's trends of abusive or manipulative behavior, and really make sure that we're being objective while also being understanding?
Well, there are trauma bonds, that is for sure, where even though you're being abused or being hurt, being manipulated, you still feel this close connection because of what you've experienced in those deep emotional experiences. And for those of us recovering from spiritual abuse, who've experienced religious trauma, we kind of get used to that cycle, to that feeling. And it becomes normal for us to experience the wound, the pain, and then to just, go back to have, this lovey-dovey, wonderful relationship with the person, everything's okay. And I think that some of that goes back to what we were talking about before with the boundaries. If you place a boundary, how is it reacted to? What does the person do when you place this new boundary in their lives? No, we're no longer, you cannot speak to me that way any longer. If your voice gets to this level, I want to have a conversation with you, but once we calm down, then we can reapproach it. If there's a huge reaction to that, listen to the people around you. What are your friends saying? What have been like, man, that doesn't seem right. How long have you been putting up with that? But it's, again, are we naming the issues in the room? Are we naming what's going on, or are we ignoring it and pretending it doesn't exist? So often, especially with women, we didn't have mental health training. We don't know what things are. And we've been taught all these abusive things are what life is, what true, like, there's the new movie out, which I know is huge, like, whatever, Redeeming Love. And so many people are like, especially Christian women, are just all over thinking it's the most wonderful love story. Well, never once does he ask her if she's okay, like, about her mental health, about her physical health, about all of these things. He's wanting something from her. And, anyway, we won't go into that one. But we've been conditioned to accept all of these behaviors as normal. And it is very hard to see our way out of it. So a lot of it is educating yourself. What is trauma? What is trauma bonding? What is abuse? What is all of these things? And is educating yourself, so then you can actually go, wait a second, this isn't okay. So is everything being swept under the rug, or are we naming it? How are people responding when those boundaries are being put in place? Are they encouraging you to have more freedom and to go find help, go see therapists, go get the help you need? Or are they shaming you and guilting you for wanting to, fix whatever you feel needs to be worked on?
Yeah. So someone actually messaged me and said, have you seen Redeeming Love? Because I want to hear your perspective. And I was like, no. It's like, it doesn't sound interesting to me at all. But I'm glad you gave your little your thought on it. But yeah,
a lot more thoughts, but I won't share them. So
yeah, I think it's a good litmus test, even going to new relationships, like checking those boundaries. And and obviously too, like, there's a whole flip side of this conversation where I think sometimes people set what they call boundaries and they're hiding something that should be talked about, that,
Hmm. Yeah.
people do that all the time. But I think, I shared a clip about a year ago, and it's become shockingly relevant in the last couple months. But one of the things I shared was, if you want to find out if a pastor's toxic or not, disagree with them. And I
Hmm.
think that relationship, or that rings true in relationships across all stripes.
Yes.
When it comes to family relationships, when it comes to relationships we jump into trying to escape family,
Hmm.
is trying to not in the beginning just be completely passive and submissive to everything that someone says. Like, when there's a disagreement, like, share it, like, not in a jerkish way, but like, at this point, you know and you could disagree if you wouldn't give this advice, but at this point, for me, I'm a pretty open book. Like, I lay out where I'm at, what my views
Hmm.
are, and I also lay out, I'm totally fine with someone having different viewpoints, but I want to be able to sit down and have that conversation without there being this, you know condescending tone or reaction between the two of us. And so now,
Yeah.
because the more authentic I've been to who I am, the more it's
Hmm.
narrowed my friend group and relationship group, and even some family group, down quite a bit. And all it's done,
Yeah.
like, when I see that happen, it's saving me hurt that's going to come 2, 3, 4 years down the road, when
Hmm.
they find out that I think this about, in the religious world, it was like about drinking, or when they find out about my view on this, or like even very
Hmm.
recently with the show, like when they find out about where I'm actually at on my faith journey, or where they find out I
Hmm.
am with my stance on this. Like, to me, it's been better for me to lay those out and
Hmm.
let people kind of check themselves or remove themselves from the situation. But I don't know if that's healthy or if there's something bad there. But I just think a lot of times, especially with family, we conceal what we actually think for the sake of relationship. But
Hmm.
you don't have much of a relationship if who you are is going to end it. you know, that's
Yeah.
a pretty rough place to be.
Well, you bring up a couple thoughts for me. One is, somehow in our minds, and again, this may be all the fundamentalist or religious conditioning, you can only have a successful marriage if both of you believe everything exactly the same.
Mm. Dave Ramsey just posted this literally
Oh,
two
did
days
he?
ago. He just posted, before you get married, and he listed like the things you should be in agreement on. And I think there's some truth to this in some level, but it's like, what do you think about money? Make sure you're religiously on the same page. How you want to raise. And I was reading it as someone, like, I haven't been married as long as Dave Ramsey, but like, our list has changed in every category over 5
Mhm,
years. Like, if your
mhm.
foundation of your relationship is we completely agree on money, parenting, which you don't even know what to know about parenting until you're a
Not till
parent,
you're a parent.
right? Like, all those things are just what ifs. And so, like, I think having that, like, oh, we need to 100% be on the same page. Like, that's why you see a lot of marriages fail the minute somebody starts questioning anything. Your rooting, I think, has to be a little bit deeper than that. I think the healthier approach is, you know, how do you handle conflict? How do we work
Mhm.
through issues? Because, again, like, in my relationship, not to put it all out on the open page, but like, we've had a very healthy relationship over the last year, as I go through very drastic shifts in beliefs
Yeah.
and worldview. But it's because our relationship is not rooted on us agreeing on everything. Our relationship's
Yeah.
rooted on how do we have conversations about those changes. That's a much
Yes.
healthier, mature approach, I think, to those kind of things. But anyway, not to sidetrack or be the
No,
old man
you're
that
no,
rants
you're
at the clouds.
absolutely
But
correct. No, you're correct, because conflict resolution is something that I am still learning about.
mhm,
Because again, we just ignore all the things we're taught, that like that's the culture of, just we just pretend something didn't happen and we just move on with our lives like nothing ever happened.
yeah,
That is so
and that's
not healthy.
that's why people become so partisan, because you don't know how to exist in a world where someone's different. Like, that's why you
Mhm.
see this tribalism within families. That's why you see this tribalism within political parties. Like, the idea of me sitting with someone who I disagree with is like mind blowing to people. Like, it just,
Yeah.
not even that, like, that person's like in themselves unreasonable. It's like, you're not
Mhm.
taught how to do that. You're not taught how
Yeah.
to sit in a room with someone you disagree with.
Yeah. Well, I know with parenting, I don't know if it was Dobson or Gothard or who pushed it, but it's
Well,
where parents should never disagree in front of their children, that parents
mhm,
should always have a united front. Okay. How is that realistic? How is that real world? I haven't done that in my family at all with my daughter. And so my daughter is 12 years old now. And the other day, her dad and I were not agreeing on something. And I looked at her and I said, you know what, sweetie? Mommy and daddy don't agree right now, but that doesn't mean that we don't love each other. She's like, oh, I know. And then she said, people fight all the time. Like, we're not fighting, we're disagreeing. And she was like, yeah, people don't always agree, Mom. It's fine.
mhm,
And so that again, that's a healthy place to be. And learning how to fight well, learning how to, there's different, I'm in a leadership program right now, and there's like the conflict wheel. It's how to make I statements, I feel, or I need, or I want, or I wonder, instead of you make me and you do that. So there's different tools that you can find to help you through conflict, and healthy conflict is healthy. It's
mhm.
good because it does name things. It names an emotion. It names a, I don't know what it is, but I'm frustrated. And it gets it out there instead of hiding it, instead of keeping those things inside us, which eventually your tea kettle is going to start whistling, and it's going to be unhealthy. It's going to be dangerous and scary. But another thought when you were talking about relationships, like you were saying that you've kind of lost some from your family and your friendship
Mhm.
circle and all of that. That is one of the elements. And we have the two sections in the book on grief and loss. And that's something that we don't expect as we get a surprise DNA result, or, suddenly I'm going to change my perspective on divorce and spanking my kid and whatever it might be. We don't realize sometimes it's not just the belief or the community, but it's this loss of relationships. It's we grieve. And you said it's better now than later, but I bet you've still felt some grief and
Oh,
loss.
yeah, definitely.
And while it's manageable because it's a choice that you've been able to make, um, it's still this whole process that we didn't expect. Like, well, yes, I know that that was an abusive person, but why am I grieving their loss? Why am I grieving the fact that I no longer have a relationship with
Mhm.
somebody who was abusive to me or to a sibling, or or whatever it may have been. um, but we still go there. And so that's what I say somewhere in the book about it's not the person, it's you. It shows that you know how to love. It shows that you can have empathy. It shows, so if you are grieving the loss of a relationship that wasn't healthy, that's normal, that's natural, that's a good thing. That means that you know how to open yourself up in love.
Yeah, it means you're not a sociopath, which is always a good thing to know. So,
That's always
um,
good.
yeah, I mean, no, we talked beforehand. I mean, it's something that, I felt like, you know, again, with massive shifts in my, I don't
Mhm.
even like saying because even the language has been so used, but like just coming to points of saying,
Yeah.
I don't know about certain topics, or I'm not
Yeah.
willing to
Yeah.
even make a stand on a topic has cost relationships,
Mhm.
and it is like even relationships that are pretty new, like
Yeah.
losing those doesn't hurt. Like it's not like they don't hurt. Like there's just less hurt than if it had been 10 years down the road, but it still freaking hurts, like it still takes
Mhm.
a stab at you, and
Yeah.
but I think again, like I think you're not doing yourself favors by putting that off, by putting that,
Yeah.
like, hey, let's just keep pushing through and keep keep fighting for this. Especially, I think, what we've circled is like if it's a one-sided fight, like
Mhm.
I've put myself in a lot of positions over the years where like I'm fighting for, and I think this is where the grief comes in. I'm fighting for what I believe this could be or what this relationship
Yes.
could be.
Mhm.
And, whether for somebody that's, oh, if my dad was an awesome dad, that would be so cool. And they'll stick in this really horrible environment for a long time. Or if my spouse understood where I was coming from,
Mhm.
if I stay in for another couple years, this will work out.
Mhm.
Or if this pastor, sees the light of what I'm trying to look at, like,
Yeah.
we work ourselves. And I think that's what we grieve when a relationship falls apart is like, for me, losing relationships the last few months, it doesn't have to be like this. Like literally we
Yeah.
could just disagree and coexist, but the other party can't, for ideological reasons or whatever their view is. They can't. And that's really, it's not even like an angry thing. It's sad. Like it's really sad. Sometimes it's an angry thing, but
Yeah.
for the most part, like the lingering emotion I feel when relationships like that fall apart is, this is really sad. It's sad that we can't look past this and have what this could be. This relationship could be
It's a very
amazing.
human thing, and it's also a very fundamentalist thing,
Mm,
to choose a principle over a person.
yeah.
But how many times, if you do go look in the Bible and read the times where Jesus chose people over principles, the woman at the well, like whatever, how we can look at all these things, especially the woman at the well, or the woman caught in adultery, like he was choosing her over what all the religious leaders of the day were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she was caught in adultery and she should be stoned, and well, where's the man? And what did he say to her? What did he actually say? But he was choosing the person. He was going to the woman caught in adultery. He was connecting with her instead of with the religious people. And so that's just using one example. But I think we want to be right. We want to side with what's right. We're so focused on, I have to be right. There's a song, I think it's a country song, that with my daughter, I've even said, even when I lose, I'm winning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how relationships should be looked at. You
Mm-hmm.
might be losing this one thing, but you're actually winning the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So you lost a fight. Well, you maintained your relationship. It's not about being right. It's not about winning. It's not about having the right, whatever, whether it's doctrine or philosophies or political views, or it's about winning in the relationship. And if you look at it from a Christian perspective, again, Jesus chose the person every time over the principle.
Right.
And yeah, anyway.
Well, he exemplified the spirit of the law over the letter of the law, like there were plenty of times where someone would try to call him on, oh, you're healing on a Sunday, or you're doing, or on the not Sunday, Saturday.
You're on the Sabbath. There you go.
Everyone's going to be like, see, he doesn't even know his theology. But like, but for him, like it was, no, like that would not be something that's restricted. Like that was not a violation of the law. It was not this work, it was this to do this service, and there were so many moments like that where you see Jesus, which is why I think Jesus is a compelling figure, is that he stepped beyond what was written on the page and said, like, this is what's right, like this is what's right. And you can follow the letter of the law and not be right. You can follow the principles laid out and not be right. But you can follow the spirit of the law. You can still keep the law without, doing these extra things that aren't going to help you or are not going to help the other person. And I think it's the same way, again, with a lot of these relationships. Like we draw these lines in the sand, and we don't think about like what's best for this person, what's best in this moment, instead of laying out a broad, like, here's my rule for every single person in the exact same box. Like, what's best in this moment in this relationship. I think that's such a much better approach.
Well, we love formulas. I mean, even the 5 love languages, it's a formula.
Yeah.
And we have to
or
fit
enneagrams or whatever it is. Yeah.
Myers-Briggs, even the whole spiritual gifts testing that so many churches still do. It puts everything into this little box. It's categorized. It's easy to understand because there's a structure and a system. So we anticipate that our relationships, okay, well, you're an Enneagram 6 and I'm a Myers-Briggs this, and your gifting is this, and so we just build these little structures because it feels manageable to us. Yeah. So when something like a miscarriage, the death of a loved one, a sibling comes out, someone changes, they're now Methodist instead of Baptist, or they no longer identify as a Christian. When that didn't fit into that neatly structured formula and plan and system, what do we do?
No.
It feels like chaos. And so that's where leaving behind legalism, leaving behind all of this is so important, because people are so much bigger than systems and structures and formulas and stages and levels and types.
Hmm.
Um, Relationships and people are changing and morphing and growing and learning and having tragedy strike that's not our fault. And so you can't expect that things are always going to go one way
Hmm.
every time.
No.
And that's where, like you were saying, we have to, you kind of, it's the whole, friends, pivot. We have to be able to do that in relationships, but it's not losing a core value. So
Hmm.
even though you, like you were saying about your marriage, your core values are still the same.
Hmm.
You still value family. You still value, being a good dad and a good husband. And you still have these core values. And when you got married, your wife didn't marry your beliefs. She married you.
Hmm.
And people miss that.
Oh,
And we focus again on all these principles instead of looking at the person.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've covered so many different angles on this, but I am
We
curious.
have.
Every time I talk to an author, if someone was to pick up a copy of the book, which they
Mhm.
should, there's a link in the show notes, so click that below and grab a copy. If someone is to grab a copy of the book, what's the one thing that you hope they'll take away from it after reading through?
Mhm.
What's the one big idea you'd hope universally, like everybody will grab at least this one concept or one idea?
Mm. Well, I wanted When Family Hurts to feel accessible, but I also wanted it to challenge you.
Hmm.
And I have felt hopeless and helpless many times in different situations with people that I cared about greatly. And I've never been asked that question before, but my gut knee jerk reaction is that I want you to know that there is something you can do about it, that you don't just have to hurt all
Hmm.
the time. I know you want to do something, because I wanted to do something, but I couldn't find the answers. I couldn't find a tool, a resource, a help, a guide, anything to help me figure out my complicated feelings, this complicated, messy situations. I couldn't
Right.
figure it out. And so I hope that when you're finished with the 30 days, and some people have been telling me they sit down and they read the whole thing, because I mean, the book's not super long. You can sit down, um, and there's areas to read, and there's areas, there's an action item, and then there's a question time, and you can write all in the book. Um, but the big takeaway would be that there is something you can do that will help you moving forward. You can take ownership. There are things that it's already inside you. It's
Hmm.
already in your heart, in your mind, in your core beliefs, in your values. You do already have those answers, but our emotions, and again, not being able to control what other people are doing or have done, um, that muddles our minds. It confuses us, and the hurt is so deep. And
Hmm.
so I want you to know that there is something that you can do to start taking control of the messy emotions and the muddled mind. Um, and you don't have to feel like you're on an island all by yourself with no help, no hope. That there is hope, and there is something you can do about it.
Love that. Yeah, that's great. And I think that comes through, I think, in the book. And I think it's
Mm,
something that, it's even funny asking you, like, universally, what would you hope applies? But I think, again, I think while it applies to everybody, I think everyone's takeaway is going to be slightly different. I think there's going to be
mhm.
different perspectives or different situations or different relationships they're thinking of as they kind of work through it. But I just want to say thank you. I mean, obviously for taking the time to do this twice, to come on the show and
Oh, yeah.
share, but also just for the hours and hours of work put into the book, into all the work you're doing with your nonprofit, just everything across the board. I really appreciate watching it from afar, and even though I'm notoriously horrible with messaging people and telling them, I love watching and seeing the work you're doing. I think it's
Mhm.
awesome.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. What's the
Thank
best
you
place
for
for
having me.
people? Yeah, yeah. What's the best place for people to connect with you if they want to kind of follow your journey?
Well, you can go to my website, RebekahDrumsta.com, or I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Also, if you give me your email address on my website, you will be given access to the first 2 days of this 30-day self-coaching guide, When Family Hurts. So you can kind of preview the book and see if it's something that might be a good resource for you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, awesome. You guys check that out. Go ahead and click the link in the show notes of this episode. And Rebekah, thanks
Awesome.
again for joining me.
Thank you.